Hello everybody, this is Lara with your weekly video for Bitcoin for the week beginning Monday 28th of March 2022. Very exciting, we've seen an upward breakout above resistance yesterday, which was 45,500. That breakout happened yesterday, the 27th of March. That's exactly what the Elliott Wave count is expected, and it looks like a third wave is in its early stages. There's a very bullish signal from ADX, at the daily chart level. I'm expecting overall upward movement to continue. There will be consolidations and pullbacks along the way. Price does not move in a straight line. The Elliott Wave count will try and give structure to those pullbacks. I'm expecting overall upward movement to continue for years. Let's have a look at the Elliott Wave counts, and as always, my targets are highly provisional. Back into December 2017, up to that important high, which was just under 20,000, I was analysing Bitcoin on a daily basis, and I gave up on targets because it doesn't reliably exhibit Fibonacci ratios between its waves, and when it does, they are very extreme. So my targets are highly provisional. I will rather use classic analysis techniques to identify the end of primary 3 and eventually the end of cycle 3 and eventually the end of cycle 5 in years to come. For now, I'm going to look at Bitcoin's past price history to try and calculate some targets. Within cycle wave 1, which you can see on the monthly chart, and I update that once a month at the beginning of each month, so I'll do that again next week for you. Within cycle wave 1, its primary wave 3 was 38.87 times the length of its primary 1. If within cycle 3, primary 3 exhibits that same relationship to its primary wave 1, then a target would be 417,507. This is not a Fibonacci ratio. This ratio is based on Bitcoin's past price history. So that's a reasonable target, just to try and get a ballpark idea of where primary 3 could possibly end up. That's a very high target. Cycle 3 may only subdivide as an impulse, which will be labelled at primary degree 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Primary 3 may only subdivide as an impulse. That will be labelled intermediate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Intermediate 3 may only subdivide as an impulse, and that will be labelled minor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Draw a base channel around minor 1 and 2 from the start of 1 to the end of 2. Place a copy on 1. During minor wave 3, pullbacks would be expected to find support at the lower edge of the channel. Although price has now moved up far enough away above this trend line, I do not expect pullbacks to get down that low. Minor wave 3 should have the power to break above the upper edge of the base channel. When it does that, I'll redraw an acceleration channel for it. But for now, on the way up, we might see a little resistance here. And then once we've seen a breakthrough above this trend line, then a pullback for support may be found. Minor 3 must move beyond the end of 1. Likewise, intermediate 3 must move beyond the end of 1. And primary 3 has moved beyond the end of primary 1. Within minor 3, no second wave correction may move beyond its start, below 33,184.06. Bitcoin exhibits very deep second wave corrections. Cycle 2 was 0.84, the depth of cycle 1. Intermediate 2 here, 0.83, the depth of intermediate 1. Primary 2, 0.92, the depth of primary 1. Intermediate 2, 0.59, minor 2, 0.89. So this is relatively shallow. Well, that's okay. They don't have to be deep. They just are almost always deep. And all of the other second wave corrections on this chart are really deep. This is typical price behaviour for this market. I also have a time expectation. Again, this is highly provisional, subject to change. It's just an attempt to get an idea of when this wave may end. If primary 3 exhibits a Fibonacci 144 weeks in duration, it may end December this year. We'll see how this one unfolds. Let's take a look at the daily chart now, where the high of minor 1 is this point up here. Minor 2, very deep, and it's a double zigzag, has good subdivisions. Minor 3 beginning, minute 1, 2, minuet 1, 2, subminuet 1, 2, micro 1, 2. Now moving toward the middle of micro 3. When micro 4 arrives, it may not move into wave 1 price territory, below 42,316.555. This wave count is very bullish. It expects a third wave at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, because there's also cycle. 8 degrees is in a really early stages. This is an extremely bullish wave count. At the weekly chart level, this is an alternate. From this low to this high, you really do want to see this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A zigzag for 4, possibly a zigzag for 2, decent enough proportion between the two of them, and a short little fifth wave. For any normal market, this is how I would label this impulse, but this is an alternate for Bitcoin because of the length of intermediate 3 in relation to intermediate 1. Intermediate 3 is just 5.71 times the length of intermediate wave 1. For a normal market, that would be considered quite long, but when I look at Bitcoin's price history and I look at its large degree third waves, they are at least 15 times the length of their first waves. And so this is very short for this particular market, reducing the probability of this wave count. But it looks like a really good wave count, so let's consider it. It's a good idea to not get stuck on one wave count, and to do Elliott Wave properly, you should always be working with alternates wherever possible. What if we do have a 5-wave impulse over up here? That could mean primary wave 1 only was over there, which means primary 2 should continue lower. This first target may actually have a decent probability, because this would mean that primary 2 does not overlap back into cycle wave 1 price territory. That's not an Elliott Wave rule, that's just an expectation based on past behaviour for this market. When Bitcoin forms those extremely important highs, like December 2017, just under 20,000, it doesn't, and after it's moved beyond those, after a big bear market, it doesn't tend to overlap back into that price territory. So I would expect that's going to provide extremely strong support. This normal range would expect an overlap, so normally you'd expect primary 2 to be that deep, but in this instance it may actually be more like 28,249 if it continues lower. Primary 2 may not move beyond the start of 1 below 3191.3035. At the daily chart level, this is how I'd label primary 2 continuing now. Intermediate A, a 5-wave impulse. Intermediate B may now be continuing higher as a double zigzag. Intermediate B may not move beyond the start of A above 68,789.625. And the target 2237. At the weekly chart level, this is another alternate. Instead of primary 1 over here, what if this is part of intermediate 4? What if intermediate 4 wasn't over here and is continuing sideways as a running contracting triangle? A, B, C all complete, D to move higher, E may not move below C, below 33,184.06. If this turns out to be a barrier triangle, then D may not move reasonably above B. If we get a new high reasonably above this point, then I will discard this wave count. It's also an alternate that has a lower probability. The same problem here, intermediate 3 is only 5.71 the length of intermediate 1. Okay, classic analysis now. We have a very exciting upwards breakout above resistance, which was 45,500 and may now be expected to provide some support. This upward week has closed above resistance on an upward week which has support from volume compared to the week immediately prior, and so we can have some confidence in this upward breakout. Next resistance on the daily chart about 50,000 to 51,000, and above that about 65,000. On balance, volume has not broken out of its range, it's still range bound. RSI in neutral territory, ADX still declining, indicating no clear trend. This week we have a crossover with the positive DX line crossing above the negative, indicating a potential trend change to upward. If the black ADX line then turns upward and is above 15, then an upward trend would be indicated. Not there yet, but getting set up for it. ATR still declining as price essentially moves sideways. Stochastics neutral, and I'm just going to leave this correlation coefficient between Bitcoin and the S&P 500 here. I'm not expecting these two markets to be correlated, so I don't base my analysis of one on what the other may or may not be doing. At the daily chart level, here's the upward breakout on an upward session which had support from volume compared to the session immediately prior. This upward breakout above 45,500 we can now have some confidence in, and ADX is coming up from really low levels. It's rising up, coming from below both DX lines. The positive DX line is above the negative. This is the strongest signal ADX can give. It tells us there is an upward trend, a new trend in a very early stage. RSI is just reaching into overbought, but for this market it can get extremely overbought and remain there for quite a long time while price travels a huge distance. So on its own right now this is not of a concern. Only when both of these get really extreme and then we see bearish divergence between price and RSI should we be concerned for this bullish trend. For this market, this is a typical look for an early stage, amazingly, of a bullish trend. I say amazingly because RSI is already touching into overbought. That's okay. ATR declining as price moves sideways within this consolidation. Now there's an upward breakout. I would expect to see some increase in ATR as Bitcoin starts to develop some strength in this new early upward trend. That's all from me this week with your Bitcoin analysis. I hope that everyone had an awesome weekend.